everyone, my name is Rebecca Grace from Rebecca Grace Designs, and I am the creator of the Encyclopedia of Code, which provides hundreds of copy and paste code snippets for Squarespace designers to use on their clients' websites. Today we are going to be talking about Fluid Engine. Fluid Engine is the new editor that Squarespace released. It's still Squarespace 7.1, but they've just released a new way of editing inside of the editor itself. It's made quite a few waves. Some love it, some hate it, but most people are asking, how is this going to affect my current site? So a lot of my fellow designers have released tutorials on what Fluid Engine is, how to use it, pros and cons, and all of that sort of stuff. You can check them out at these links. These were kind of my favorite ones and the ones that I felt were most kind of comprehensive on the topic. So you can check out one of those links and read through. If you haven't heard of Fluid Engine before or don't have much experience with it, I would go there first just to learn a bit about it. But as my focus is coding in Squarespace and Squarespace Code, I thought I would take a bit of a different spin on it rather than repeat what they've said in these different guides. I want to talk about specifically how is Fluid Engine going to affect your code. Now, as a Circle member, I've had a few weeks to play around with Fluid Engine, and so this is not an exhaustive list by any means. It is still fairly new to everybody, so I'm sure there's going to be more and more the more I play around with it. These are the few things that I've noticed as I've been building sites and playing with Fluid Engine. So we're going to go over what code you no longer need, what code you still need, and what code is clashing with the editor. So the first thing that I've noticed in terms of code that you no longer need with Fluid Engine is reordering and resizing blocks on mobile. So one of the biggest changes with Fluid Engine is that you can now edit the mobile view of the site. So if you're in the editor and you click on the mobile view here, you can edit inside of the editor now, which you couldn't do before in the classic editor. So you don't need code in order to reorder or resize these blocks. You can just drag and drop them wherever you would like them. And if you click on one of the corners, you can resize these and it won't change in the desktop view. So if I switch back to the desktop view, it will still look the same as it did before. Okay. You also no longer need code to change the color of a specific text or button. This isn't specific to Fluid Engine. This was released slightly before Fluid Engine, but I thought I would throw it in here as well. So in the editor, you can now highlight text and then choose a color from your palette or a custom color to change just that particular highlighted text to a different color. Again, this isn't specific to Fluid Engine. It was released before, but it is fairly new, so I thought I would add it in. They've also added in the ability to select from 3 different button styles: primary, secondary, and tertiary. So you no longer need CSS to change the color of a specific block. Let's say if you have, sometimes if you have a light image and then you have a slightly darker image, maybe you want the color button to be slightly different, even if the color theme is the same. And so now you can do that with primary, secondary, tertiary buttons. One of the biggest changes with Fluid Engine was the ability to place blocks on top of each other. So because of this, you no longer need CSS to layer elements. A popular effect before was to have images layer over top of each other or make it look like they were layering outside of their sections. This was often done with CSS or with a creative use of background images or images themselves, but you no longer need to do that in Fluid Engine. So let's say I wanted these to overlap each other. I can just drag them and have them overlap like this. And then when you have 2 blocks overlap each other, you'll see this come up in the editor, and that will change which image is on top. So something you can now do is add an image block. And I've created an image that's just a black box. I'll select for it to fill the space, and then I can drag it into whatever shape I want. And in this way, you can create some nice layering effects as well. So then I'll kind of push it to the back. And now I have, sort of like a border around my images. You can also take this image and change its shape. To create some, unique effects in here, which is something you couldn't do before unless you used code or a creative use of background images or images themselves. Another popular effect that you no longer need CSS for is positioning elements off the screen or like slightly off. So you can now take these and drag them over the grid. So even though the grid that you saw come up only goes to here, you can actually drag the elements so they're right off the page as well. So that allows you to create some unique effects. And finally, kind of following this same effect, you can now create split sections without using code. So split sections is where you have half the section an image and the other half content. So for instance, you can take an image and have it fill up half of the screen, have content on the other, and then you would have the section go to small. The smallest you can take it is 1, so if you really wanted it a true section, you would have to use CSS in order to take out that 1 pixel of white that would appear there. But you can move them like this and then shrink the section like that. So you can create this split layout where a picture takes up half the screen and content is on the other half without having to apply CSS to do that. So there's 5 things I've noticed that you no longer need code for. So what code do you still need? With this update and the ability to drag and drop a lot more freely inside of Squarespace, you're probably thinking, and I'm sure other people are saying, that coding in Squarespace is now going to be a thing of the past. You do not need to code in Squarespace. And while I agree that Fluid Engine definitely makes it easier to create a more dynamic, interesting layout without using any code, there's still going to be a lot of cases where codes and plugins are going to be useful and necessary. So this editor is exactly that. It helps you edit inside of Squarespace in terms of layout and design, but you're still going to need code for functionality. It hasn't added any new functions. So if you want a feature or a function that's not available inside of Squarespace, you're still going to need a plugin or code to do that. Or if you're trying to add effects and animations and things like that outside of what the editor can do, you're still going to need code to do that. So while you're probably going to need less code in order to create the layouts that you want, code is still going to be necessary inside of Squarespace. So outside of those 5 things that I've mentioned, pretty much all of the other code that I have placed on a site, I'm still needing and using when I've switched over to Fluid Engine, especially plugins. So if you've purchased a plugin, again, to add a feature inside of Squarespace that Squarespace didn't have, you're still going to need it with Fluid Engine. It's not adding any functionality. The third question I get is what code is clashing with Fluid Engine? there's essentially two main places that I've noticed clashing. So if you have code that is targeting a specific section inside of Squarespace, I tend to use this method to target those sections. So I use a collection ID or the pages ID, and then classes to say which section on that page I want to target. I haven't noticed it affecting that at all. But when you switch to Fluid Engine, the data section ID does change. And so if you used the data section ID to target a section, then that will change and you will need to edit that. It will break that part of your code. So you'll have to add in the new data section ID or use the method that I have here. The other major thing I've noticed is z-index. So if you wanted to layer blocks on top of each other using CSS, you would use a property called z-index. In order for Fluid Engine to layer these blocks, that's what Squarespace has done, is it's used the z-index property. So generally I haven't had to use z-index as much, but when I have, I've found it really tricky to get z-index to work. And this is because if I add a z-index to this text block to make it stand out or go above something, I can only make that z-index as high as the other sections it's in. So if I apply a z-index of 10 to this text block, but the section itself has a z-index of 2, the text box will only have a z-index of 2, so it can only be as big as its parent. So because of how Fluid Engine is in there, you have to target not just the block you're trying to add z-index to, but all of its parents to make sure that that those aren't stopping the z-index from applying. Which can get very confusing. So if you add a code block, let's say on the page, and you want to add a z-index to that code block, that can get very tricky because it's clashing with the z-index code of Fluid Engine. So that is one property that I found to be really tricky to get to work. Okay, finally, some Fluid Engine tips. My first tip is just to start using it. I know there's been some negative feedback about it. Learning curves are always scary, but Fluid Engine is here to stay. This is the way Squarespace is pushing, and so you kind of need to move with it. I have built quite a few different sites now in Fluid Engine, and I have to say that I'm actually really enjoying it. There is a bit of a learning curve, but I've found that I've adjusted quite nicely. There is some blocks and things that aren't available, like the different image blocks and stuff aren't available in that, and captions on image blocks and stuff have been taken away. I'm hoping some of these will be added back in. But for the most part, I found it has really made it more flexible for me to make the site how I've envisioned it. And as it's new, there are some bugs and kinks that need to be sorted out, but I really haven't encountered too many issues. To go along with that, my second tip is saving regularly. So because it is new and there are bugs, make sure that you are saving on a regular basis. So if the editor is starting to act funny, what I've been doing is just saving the section, going out, refreshing the page, going back in, and usually it's fine and it's working fine again. But if you're not saving on a regular basis and something does happen, I don't want you to lose all of the work that you've put in. So just make sure that you're saving on a regular basis, especially if you've done something that you like, save right away and go back in. And lastly, you need to pay attention to the mobile view. So in the old editor, it just adjusted to the mobile quite nicely, but in Fluid Engine, the mobile view here, it places the blocks in the order they were added to the section. So if I added the text box and then added the image, the text box would be on top. And so the first view of the mobile, when you first flip over to mobile view, it's probably not going to look at how you want it to look. So make sure that after each section, click over to the mobile view, rearrange the blocks. Thankfully, it's quite easy to do, but just go in and rearrange them before moving on to the next section. And there you go. That is my thoughts on the new Fluid Engine and how it will affect your code. If you like this tutorial, make sure you like and subscribe to my YouTube channel, or sign up for the freebie on my blog so you can be notified when a new tutorial is posted. Until then, that is how Fluid Engine will affect your code.